So as Teresa mentioned, my name is Rebecca Dugopolski. I'm a senior engineer with Herrera, and joining me today is Jonathan with City of Port Angeles, and we work closely on a lot of the tools that we'll be talking about today, so it's great to have him here joining me today. So we'll just go ahead and jump into things and get started. So overview of what we'll be talking about today is one slide on the permit requirements. A lot of you are pretty familiar with the permit requirements, but we'll just be stepping through the ones that we're focusing on today. A couple slides walking through the different categories of implementation tools that we'll be looking at. And then most of the talk is really focused on examples that we've developed with Port Angeles and other jurisdictions. We'll have a couple of binders circulating around the room with the hard copies of those, so sometimes it's hard to see them on the slide. It's actually good to look at kind of the paper printed version to see what that actually looks like. References at the end, and then links to where you can find some of these tools online. So definitely check out the slides when they're available online and take a look at those links if you're interested in taking a look at the actual tools. And then questions at the end. So permit requirements, so what we're really focusing on today in terms of low impact development, these tools to help implement the new requirements. We've got minimum requirement number 1, which is preparation of stormwater site plans. So there's new requirements associated with that, making sure you're getting the right submittals and the right types of things along with your submittals. So there's ways to kind of prompt that with your project proponents. Minimum requirement 2 is looking at construction stormwater pollution prevention. And that's where you're looking at that during the construction process. So through your submittal, your construction stormwater pollution prevention plan, focusing on that new element number 13 and how you really protect low impact development BMPs during the construction phase. And then minimum requirement number 5, and we know that's the big change in on-site stormwater management, where we've been switching over to implementing now list number 1, list number 2, or the LID performance standard, but really the tools we'll be talking about today is walking the user through how you would apply those 2 list approaches. And then also the infeasibility criteria, because we know those are scattered throughout the manual, so it's helpful to have one comprehensive source there. And a little bit of what Jonathan will be talking about are kind of the growing pains associated with the implementation of the lower threshold. So a lot of jurisdictions, phase 2 jurisdictions, had that 1 acre threshold, and now for minimum requirement 5, we're dropping all the way down to 2,000 square feet of hard surface. So that's a big shift and a big change for a lot of phase 2 jurisdictions if they didn't already have a lower threshold in place. Anything you wanted to add to that, or yeah?
Yeah, I just say, I'll bring the perspective of a smaller jurisdiction. So for us, when a lot of times the focus statewide was on these new LID standards, for us it was a big deal reducing those thresholds down to 7,000 square feet of disturbed area from an acre. And so how, as a jurisdiction, are we maintaining our permit compliance with this new large group of submittals coming in as a jurisdiction, and how are we going to kind of bridge that gap so that we don't stunt development in our community? So that's really our focus of why we wanted to develop this set of tools to streamline the process for us.
Thank you. So the categories of tools that we'll be talking about today, and this is just kind of an overview, we'll be going in more depth on each one of these. So starting out with guidance for small projects, so projects that are just triggering that minimum requirements number 1 through 5. Infeasibility criteria, so pulling that all together in one comprehensive place. Infeasibility mapping. Small project templates looking at both construction SWIPs and small site BMP plans. Simplified sizing tools. And then working through infiltration testing, plan review, construction site inspections, post-construction soil quality and depth, and maintenance. So kind of the full gamut all the way from what you're submitting, how you're constructing, and then how you're maintaining those facilities. So the first one on the list is guidance for small projects. So these are projects that are triggering minimum requirements 1 through 5. And if you want, we can start passing around the binders so you can flip through some examples of what those look like. I did actually forget the couple related to this topic on my desk, so those are available online, and I'll show you the links at the end. So these are tools that are targeted towards single-family residential and small commercial development. So they're typically short brochures, 4 to 5 pages, really graphical and photo intense, so not a lot of text in those. So walking kind of these smaller property owners through what the requirements are, flowcharts and tables that really outline the minimum requirement 5 process and the list approach. One example that we worked with the city of Sequim to develop, and this one's interesting because Sequim is not yet a phase 2 permittee, so they have some flexibility in how they implement the requirements. They have actually adopted Ecology's latest Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. We put together just a 4-page handout for them. The first page on the left is a worksheet, and then there's 3 pages of guidance that walk users through each of the 5 minimum requirements, 1 through 5. So they've got a little bit of flexibility when you get to minimum requirement 5. So since they're not yet a permittee, they decided to allow some more flexibility with that approach and allow users to pick anything off of that list in any order, so not a priority order. And then I'll have Jonathan walk us through what we developed with the City of Port Angeles and how that's working for them so far.
So this next one, again, for us, really focused on education. So how do we educate those primarily single-family home constructors, what are these new stormwater requirements? And so in Port Angeles, a big part was determining the difference between whether we're using LID list number 1 or, because we drain to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, list 3, a direct discharge. So providing some clarification on what the difference is, what type of low impact development techniques can they meet their requirements with.
Great. Yeah, and Jonathan mentioned list 3, and we really decided because in Port Angeles there are so many direct discharge areas that it made sense to have that 3rd list rather than a modification of list 1 or list 2. So having that list 3 just helps in a jurisdiction where you have a lot of direct discharges that go directly to, in their case, the Strait of Juan de Fuca or Port Angeles Harbor. The next tool we'll be talking about is the infeasibility criteria. So this is one that at one point was a consolidated list in the permit, and then it got pulled out of the permit and it's scattered throughout the different BMPs in Volume 3 and Volume 5 of the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. So a lot of the jurisdictions we've been working with, it's really helpful to have all those infeasibility criteria in one place so you can really walk through what the requirements are as you're moving down the list and looking at the feasibility of each BMP to have a consolidated list of things you're looking at. When we worked with City of Port Angeles, as Jonathan will show us in a minute, converting that list actually into more of a checklist, a format that a project proponent could fill out and submit along with their submittal, found that to be a useful tool. So the first one I'll show here is one that we developed with the City of Lacey, and this is tucked into the city's Stormwater Design Manual. So just walking through the different BMPs and the infeasibility criteria associated with those, starting with lawn and landscaped areas, moving on next to roofs, and then other hard surfaces. And there's a similar approach in both the Pierce County and City of Seattle Stormwater Manual that we also worked on. And then here's kind of how that morphed for City of Port Angeles.
So on this one, we had that education component, pulling all these different pieces in the Stormwater Management Manual into one document and trying to put it in as clear as language as possible so those that are filling this thing out can understand it. And then from a jurisdiction perspective, we were really looking for how are we going to maintain our permit compliance. So we wanted to make it real clear, well, why are you choosing a certain infeasibility? What's your justification for choosing it? So this form really helps because it's all fillable. We can check the box. You can type over there of what your infeasibility criteria is, why you're choosing that one. And it just helps us during the review process to quickly run through what their infeasibility was and why they picked it. And then I really think it helps even from a jurisdiction designing, just having all of those infeasibility criteria in one spot. So when you're quickly scoping out a project, you can be using this to help determine, well, is low impact development feasible here, or, oh no, there was that one, 3 pages down that was infeasible, and so that's why we're going to scope this project in a slightly different way.
Great. And so this, just zooming in on kind of what that looks like, it's an editable PDF, so you can go ahead and actually select the boxes for a criteria that's considered infeasible for that site, and then as Jonathan mentioned, filling out the description or rationale, and then you can attach additional documentation as needed. Infeasibility mapping is the next tool, and what this is looking at is incorporating information on slopes, erosion hazard areas, landslide hazard areas, contaminated soils. One thing to point out are that it doesn't typically include soils data. That's typically where a site-specific analysis is required, unless there is a term in the manual that says if you have a preponderance of soils data, then you can work that into your analysis, but you would have to have a lot of soil borings and a lot of groundwater information to get that as part of your infeasibility mapping. There's a range of scales that it can be applied to, so we've worked with some jurisdictions in doing kind of a city, county-wide infeasibility, and then other jurisdictions with doing kind of the parcel level analysis. And there's also a range of options for providing that information to a project proponent. The first example I wanted to show was actually developed by City of Seattle, and I just wanted to show this because this is actually in their web mapping, so you can actually go onto the City of Seattle's website. There's a layer here. Let's see if I can get the laser to work. Which button is it? Well, that's okay. There's a layer here called infiltration evaluation not required. You can kind of see that light blue hatched area, especially over by I-5 where there's lots of steep slope areas. So that's something you could look at if you're developing a piece of property right by I-5 and you know that you're in that infiltration evaluation not required. And so that'll help you move down the list of infeasibility criteria in terms of if you've got a steep slope or erosion hazard on site there. Here's another example that we worked with the City of Arlington to develop. So this is at the draft stage, but you can see here kind of the orange shaded areas are sites that are not feasible for bioretention. So we went through a series of maps because the criteria are slightly different for bioretention and permeable pavement, and taking a look at, and primarily the orange shaded areas there are, again, steep slope erosion hazard areas. And then this is also honing in on kind of the parcel level analysis. With City of Arlington, we did a preliminary site assessment summary report. They were finding with each application that they were getting that they had a bunch of people running around the city trying to find different types of information, and it'd be really helpful to just have this all spit out into a 2-page report. So when someone came in, they wanted to develop a piece of property, someone could just say, oh, I just want to see the site assessment report for this property. So this is automatically generated. It gives you information on which BMPs you should take a look at evaluating. It does have soils information on the second page, but that wasn't folded into the analysis. It's just for kind of some understanding of what soils are on site before you go in and do your site-specific evaluation. But some of the other criteria on page 2, such as if you have a steep slope, erosion hazard area, that is part of the analysis. So that's been a useful tool for them for new development, and they can generate that for each parcel in the city. The next one we wanted to talk about was construction stormwater pollution prevention templates, and this is kind of a 2-part one. You have a checklist or a narrative that goes along with your construction stormwater pollution prevention plan, and you also typically have your CAD details, your erosion and sediment control BMP details. So Jonathan will step us through what the City of Port Angeles, what their narrative form looks like, and then also their CAD sheet.
So this is when we got into a SWIP, you know, that reduction in thresholds for us was a pretty big deal because most people are used to doing a TESC plan, but when you said, hey, we need a SWIP and a narrative, you know, people's eyes glazed over a little bit. You go on Ecology's website, you get this funny Word document that's supposed to be a template, and it really is not user-friendly at all. So this template that we developed for the narrative basically forces an applicant to look at every single element, all 13 elements, and determine either what BMP they're going to use for each of those elements or provide some justification why that there is no BMP that needs to be employed for that. And so for us, as a jurisdiction, there was a lot of benefits in going to a template such as this. It really helped us to be able to review quickly to determine if a project was, or submittal was complete. It also saved the applicant a lot of time because instead of making each person go try to find a template to use, we have this base template, again, with fillable fields, check boxes, that we're able to really streamline the process. So that's just a zoom in. You know, each element, we provide some justification. If they can't use that, you can provide a checkbox as to why that is. So, and then our second one is, then let's get into the actual plan. So again, having a place where, in this case, we could draw, the applicant could draw their project site on here, say like their single family home, and then they could pick a certain BMP of what we typically see as pretty standard in the city of Port Angeles. And so really already having those pre-engineered details all set up. So again, we're trying to make it so that, your average builder could come in, use these templates, quickly put together his SWIP, determine what his BMPs would be, and then have some pre-engineered details that would tell him how to install those. And another added benefit with this template is we created it so we could print it out of our GIS system. So our GIS already had a lot of contours and utility map information on it. So we were able to print that information right on this area and that graph area, so then the builder could go quickly, draw his few BMPs on, and he is off and running.
All right. And then this is let's see, there we go. This is an example from City of Seattle, so very similar to what we ended up developing to City of Port Angeles, but the BMPs here are slightly different terminology in the Seattle Stormwater Manual. But zooming in, there's compost stock, stabilized construction access, filter fence, some of the basic BMPs you'd see on a small site situation. So in conjunction with the construction SWIP, we also have the small site BMP plan. So this is where you're looking at your small projects, single family residential, small commercial. Again, it's kind of a two-part where you've got the checklist narrative and then also the CAD template. First, looking at what the City of Seattle developed. This is their small site BMP plan. On the left-hand side, they've got a screenshot of the city's simplified sizing tool, which we'll be taking a look at in a minute, and then a series of details that they commonly see for low-impact development. So here's just zooming in at the infiltrating bioretention cell with sloped sides. So just one sheet with the standard city details on it. And then Jonathan will walk us through what the City of Port Angeles is using, and then also their narrative or report form.
So similar to the SWIP, again, we wanted to make a small site plan that you could quickly draw on where your home site is, or your small commercial site, and pick some pre-engineered BMPs that could be added to that. So in these cases, we customize these to the City of Port Angeles for our rainfall amounts and the typical soils, but really we went down to what is the soil that's feasible for an LID facility or not. And so we designed it with that minimum soil feasibility. So here's one example of our permeable pavement surface where we pre-engineered what the depths of our materials would be, provided some common notes so that someone could build it right off of this plan. And then our stormwater report. So this is the document we really use to pull everything together. So what are the minimum requirements 1 through 5? How are you fulfilling each one of those minimum requirements? So we wanted to make it very clear that the applicant understood what those requirements were, and then provide a place in this form to be able to document that. So all the way from the beginning of what is our project site disturbance, and can you use these forms? We only made these forms available for the small project, those that are only triggering MR 1 through 5, those that do not require engineering per se unless they're doing a specialized infiltration facility. So in Port Angeles, this is where we provide the opportunity to determine what list are you going to be. On list 1, if you're just using the standard LID list because we're going to a creek, or in the case of Port Angeles, a good part of our city, at least a third of it or more, drains to Port Angeles Harbor, Strait of Juan de Fuca, so a direct discharge water body. So we provided a map in the report that someone's able to determine what water body their project site discharges to. So some of the nice things about producing a standardized report that has those fillable fields is it makes review easier in that we always know exactly where we're looking to determine design data. And also, from the perspective of maybe a challenge is a lot of these, you got your single family home contractor filling these out. So they don't have a lot of engineering or really any stormwater experience at all. So we've really found that up front, there's been a lot of educational needs, providing a lot of explanation what terms mean. So that's some of the areas that we're actually doing a revision on this small stormwater report right now, and providing some additional explanation. But you know, you got to strike a balance, because if you put too many words on there, you could have all the explanations, but they're just going to gloss right over those words. So trying to strike that balance between having enough information so that your average non-engineer could read through this, to figure out what their stormwater requirements are, document it, and submit it for us to review.
Great. All right, and the next thing I wanted to briefly touch on is simplified sizing tools or calculators. These are typically kind of Excel spreadsheets with built-in macros. They're based on a lot of continuous modeling on the back end, and then the spreadsheet themselves just allows the user to easily go in and select drainage basin, what the standard is they're trying to achieve, whether that's runoff treatment or flow control, and the amount of area requiring management. The two examples that I brought today are for the city of Seattle. They've got a calculator that's based on their on-site stormwater management, which is looking at that minimum requirement 5. So looking at the different BMPs, the site area, and that helps you select the appropriate size for those BMPs. And then the other one is looking at pre-size flow control. So this is looking at sites that are 10,000 square feet of hard surface or less, and so looking at what BMPs you're using and what size those need to be for those sites. So this is just a useful tool. It is based on a lot of modeling, but then the user doesn't have to actually perform the modeling themselves. They just need to fill out the calculator and size things with the correct assumptions that went into the modeling. The next one I wanted to touch on briefly is infiltration testing, and there were some tools mentioned yesterday for those of you that were at the infiltration workshop. A couple examples that I brought today were developed by the City of Seattle. There's a simple infiltration test checklist and also a pilot infiltration test checklist. Both are fairly short, 4 to 5 pages, and apply to those small sites, typically 5,000 square feet of hard surface or less. They walk you through the test requirements. There's even a calculator on there that helps you fill in the results of your test and determine what your infiltration rate is. And then there's also some examples that we worked with City of Edmonds and Pierce County to develop. And those are more kind of on the plan review end. These are more for the user perspective. So that kind of builds into a plan review checklist, so what you take a look at in terms of what's being submitted. So obviously if you're using something like the templates that Port Angeles, that we developed with Port Angeles, where you've got everything there, hopefully you're getting all the right information that you need to do your plan review. But if you don't have a template like that, or if you're using this for larger sites, it's good to have a list of all those criteria because they are somewhat scattered throughout Ecology's manual. So plan review checklist includes the items that are required by Ecology's manual and also city or county specific items. So along with that, you may not have everything in Ecology's manual that you actually want to see in your submittal. And that's something that's helpful for the project proponent to know what they're submitting is what you want to look at, and also for your plan review staff to make sure that all the correct information was submitted. The one example I brought here is pulled from the City of Tacoma's manual, their 2016 Stormwater Management Manual, and they walk through each of the minimum requirements and a list of what's required for submittals. Currently finalizing some work with City of Edmonds on a plan review checklist for them, so walking through stormwater plan submittals, and then even design checklist for things such as bioretention and permeable pavement, really honing in on all the detail that's needed for those. The next one we have is construction site inspection checklist, and this is something that Ecology does have a checklist. I don't know if you're aware of that, but on Ecology's website there is a checklist that includes all of the elements and what you should be taking a look at as part of construction site inspections, and that does incorporate the new element number 13, although there's only 5 items on there for element number 13, so it's fairly limited with that. Some of the things we worked with other clients is pulling that information into a city or county specific checklist, adding a column for construction phase, because there are different things that you look at during different phases of construction, and it is sometimes helpful to have that information to know if you're out there for pre-construction inspection, here are the things you should be looking at. If you're out there during construction, and then here's what you need to look at post-construction inspections. And so here is kind of just the screenshot of what Ecology's checklist looks like. And then looking at element number 13, so that's where those 5 things are that you take a look at in terms of protecting LID BMPs. So whether it's been inspected, if it needs maintenance, if it's failed, and actions that are required. And here's the example that City of Port Angeles is currently using. Did you want to talk about this a little bit?
Well, I'll just add that, we have, just like Ecology, the pre-construction, during construction, and post-construction. The beauty of having these pre-inspection forms is it helps provide consistency across all the inspectors and departments within the city. And it also provides us some documentation. So when Ecology comes and audits, we haven't just said, well, we inspected on this date, but we can produce, here's what we actually looked for, here's what we found. And it provides us a way to actually come back and follow up on deficiencies.
And then this is just looking at for City of Sequim, we added that extra column, so that second column looks at construction phase. So what you'd be taking a look at, their phase 1 is what they're calling pre-construction inspection, phase 2 during construction, and then phase 3 is post-construction. And then just wanted to briefly show a checklist that we worked with Pierce County to develop, and just the complexity of what that protecting LID BMPs could actually look like. So on Ecology's checklist, we had 5 items that we looked at. On Pierce County's checklist, they have 76 different items that they look at. So there's definitely a range of complexity in terms of protecting LID BMPs and how much detail you may need there. And Pierce County did go to the level of looking at BMP by BMP and what's needed for protecting LID BMPs. And there's a lot of great information out there, but it is helpful to maybe have some additional detail, but some jurisdictions are thinking somewhere in the middle range. So 5 is too small, but 76 is probably too long. So somewhere in the middle there. The last couple tools that we're going to look at are post-construction soil quality and depth. So there's already a lot of great information out there. This is one BMP that maybe was not always fully implemented with the last manual, so now it's kind of brought to the forefront with minimum requirement number 5. So there's these tools contain some basic information on the 5-step process, what some of the infeasibility criteria are. Having a worksheet with checkboxes and calculations helps you determine how much you need to bring in terms of compost amendment, and then example calculations. And so Jonathan will just show us what the City of Port Angeles worksheet looks like.
So this worksheet, it really molds education along with a worksheet and some formulas to actually determine how much amended soils you need to be bringing in or amending on your site, depending if you have like a grass area or a landscaped area. And so the nice thing about this form is it provides some consistency. And we were seeing in the past a lot of times where developers, you already have a cleared site and it's since grown back of grass, and developer would say, well, I'm gonna pull all that topsoil all together in a pile and reuse it on my site later. Well, really, there was very little organics in that soil in the first place because it had already been disturbed, a number of years ago when the site was first cleared. And so this really provided us a way to document, well, if you want to use your on-site soils, you're going to have to actually provide us some soil data that shows that you have that necessary soil organic content. Now, if you're going a pre-amended soil application rate, we have a nice little quick formula for you to determine how much compost you need to bring in. Or likewise, if you decide to choose another option and just bring in straight topsoil, again, we have the nice little formula there with our checkboxes so you can determine how much soil to bring in. So it makes it nice and easy for the applicant to really determine what his requirements are going to be and what the expectations will be on his site.
Yeah, and I think the one good thing about the Port Angeles tool is that you've got that one main source of compost, so that makes it a little more streamlined as you have the one source of compost from the landfill, so we were able to kind of streamline the checklist with that in mind. All right, so we've got just a couple more things before we wrap up. So maintenance checklist, I think, is the last thing on my list, and these are, Ecology has some great maintenance criteria in their manual, but bringing that forward to actually going out and taking a look at maintenance, it's not set up in a way to actually document your inspections on site. So some potential things to look at are adding columns for documenting your inspection findings and columns for documenting your maintenance and repair activities. A lot of jurisdictions are shifting towards having some sort of web application or mobile application as well, and that's a great way to incorporate that. So this is one that we did for the city of Sequim, so taking all the criteria in Ecologies manual and just adding columns where they can document if it was satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and comments associated with that so they can document in their inspections. And another good example from the City of Lacey Stormwater Manual. So here they've got a description of what a bioretention cell is, so it's kind of an educational piece. And then along with their maintenance checklist here, they can check if they've checked for a certain condition, and then if they've done any corrective maintenance, they've got a column there to address that as well. So I mentioned a lot of things. We've got a couple binders floating around with some examples, but here are also the web links if you want to take a look at those online. And I believe these slides will be available through the Stormwater Center, so you'll be able to actually click on those links. So those are the ones that we developed with City of Sequim, the ones that we're working on with Jonathan, although some of those were in the process of being updated, and so your urban services standards will be updated at that time as well. City of Lacey Stormwater Manuals there. City of Seattle, those couple of links that I mentioned, City of Tacoma, and then the checklist on Ecology's website. And then I also wanted to acknowledge all the cities that we've worked with, and also Pierce County through this process. So Jonathan was great to work with on developing these tools. Bill Blake will be joining us for the StormCon presentation that we'll be giving. And then Ansel at City of Sequim, Doug Christensen at City of Lacey, and Sherelle Ehlers at City of Seattle. And then I did pull some examples from City of Tacoma. We didn't work with them, but wanted to acknowledge them as well. And then Pierce County. So